Maybe it's time you considered discharge, Sergeant Rodriguez, the base psychiatrist suggested, watching Carlos struggle with his new reality after losing his right arm to an IED explosion. His squad members whispered behind his back. Commanders avoided giving him real assignments, and everyone treated him like a charity case. Tonight, when insurgents breached their forward operating base, the soldier they'd written off would remind them that a warrior's strength comes from the heart, not the limbs. Welcome to the human stories. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe that true strength comes from within, hit that subscribe button. This story will show you that sometimes the most broken-looking warriors are the ones with the most fight left in them. Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had been the best soldier in Bravo Company before the roadside bomb changed everything. 15 years of military service, 3 combat deployments, and a chest full of commendations meant nothing after that explosion in Kandahar took his right arm and nearly his life. 8 months later, back at Forward Operating Base Mackenzie in Afghanistan, Carlos was learning to navigate a world that no longer saw him as a warrior. The prosthetic arm was functional but clumsy. Simple tasks that once required no thought now demanded concentration and effort. "Rodriguez, you're on infantry duty again," announced Captain Morrison, avoiding eye contact as he handed Carlos a clipboard. It was the same assignment he'd been given for weeks, counting supplies, organizing equipment, staying safely away from anything that resembled real soldiering. "Sir, I'd like to request patrol duty," Carlos said quietly. Captain Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Carlos, you know that's not possible. The medical board was clear about your limitations." "My limitations, sir." "Look, Rodriguez, nobody questions your courage or experience, but in combat situations, you need soldiers who can operate at 100% capacity." Carlos watched through the window as his former squad prepared for a night patrol. Corporal Jenkins, who Carlos had trained personally, was now leading the team that used to be his. Private Martinez, barely 19 years old, carried the radio that Carlos had operated for 3 years. "They think you're done, Sergeant," whispered Specialist Thompson, approaching Carlos's desk. "Word is, they're processing your discharge papers." Carlos had heard the whispers, the sympathetic looks, the careful way his fellow soldiers spoke around him, as if his missing arm had also damaged his ears and brain. That evening, Dr. Patricia Collins, the base psychiatrist, called Carlos to her office. "Carlos, I've been reviewing your progress reports. Physically, you're adapting well to the prosthetic, but emotionally, I'm concerned about your adjustment to your new circumstances." "My new circumstances, ma'am? Your role here has changed. Maybe it's time you considered discharge. There are excellent veteran support programs stateside. You could start a new chapter of your life." Carlos looked at the woman who had never spent a day in combat, telling him it was time to give up the only life he'd ever known. "With respect, ma'am, this is my life. These soldiers are my family. I'm not ready to start a new chapter." "Carlos, acceptance is part of healing. You can't be the soldier you used to be." That night at 03 for 7 hours, the attack sirens shattered the quiet of FOB Mackenzie. Carlos jolted awake in his bunk as explosions rocked the base perimeter. "This is not a drill," came the announcement over the intercom. "We are under direct assault. All personnel to defensive positions." Carlos grabbed his gear with practiced efficiency, his left arm compensating for what his right arm couldn't do. As he rushed toward the command post, he could see muzzle flashes in the darkness beyond the wire. Rodriguez Captain Morrison spotted him in the chaos. "Get to the bunker with the other non-combat personnel." "Sir, respectfully, I'm still a soldier." "That's an order, Sergeant." But as Carlos reluctantly moved toward the bunker, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The distinctive sound of an RPG launcher being armed, coming from inside the base perimeter. The insurgents hadn't just attacked from outside. They'd breached the wire and were operating within the compound. "Captain," Carlos shouted over the noise of gunfire, "we've got infiltrators inside the base. What are you talking about?" "The sound, sir. RPG launcher, approximately 50 meters northeast of the command post. They're inside our perimeter." Captain Morrison looked skeptical, but Carlos was already moving. 15 years of combat experience had taught him to trust his ears, and right now they were telling him that his fellow soldiers were about to be hit from behind. Carlos spotted the insurgent team setting up their rocket launcher behind a supply container, perfectly positioned to destroy the command post where half the base's leadership was coordinating the defense. With no time to get help and no way to call for backup without alerting the enemy, Carlos had a choice: follow orders and let his brothers die, or break every rule and engage with one functioning arm. Carlos chose to fight. Moving with the stealth that had made him legendary in his unit, Carlos approached the insurgent position. His missing right arm made conventional combat techniques impossible. But 15 years of experience had taught him that improvisation could overcome any limitation. Using his left hand and his knowledge of the base layout, Carlos positioned himself for an attack that would have to be perfect. He wouldn't get a second chance. The lead insurgent was preparing to fire the RPG at the command post when Carlos struck, using his prosthetic arm as a club and his good arm for precision. He took down the first enemy soldier before the others knew what was happening. The firefight that followed lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. Carlos used every trick he'd learned in 15 years of combat, compensating for his physical limitations with tactical knowledge that only came from experience. When the smoke cleared, Carlos had neutralized 4 insurgents and prevented the destruction of the command post. But he'd also taken a bullet in his shoulder and was losing blood fast. "Rodriguez," Captain Morrison's voice echoed across the compound as he rushed to Carlos's position. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life, sir," Carlos replied weakly, gesturing toward the RPG that had been aimed directly at the command post. As medics worked to stop Carlos's bleeding, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The insurgent team he'd eliminated had been moments away from destroying the base's communication center and command structure. Without Carlos's intervention, the attack would have been devastating. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Captain Morrison said as Carlos was loaded onto a stretcher, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." "No apology needed, sir. Just doing my job." "Your job was to stay in the bunker." Carlos managed a weak smile. "Sir, my job is to protect my brothers. That job doesn't change because I lost an arm." 2 weeks later, Carlos Rodriguez was awarded the Silver Star for his actions during the Fob Mackenzie attack. But more importantly, he was restored to active duty status and given command of a training unit, where his experience and determination would help prepare the next generation of soldiers. "Sergeant Rodriguez," asked one of his new trainees, a young private who couldn't stop staring at the prosthetic arm, "how do you do it? How do you keep fighting after what happened to you?" Carlos looked at the young soldier and thought about the question that had haunted him for months. "Son, I learned something important that night. Losing part of your body doesn't make you less of a soldier. It just makes you a different kind of soldier. And sometimes, different is exactly what the mission requires." The soldier they'd called useless had proven that courage, experience, and heart could overcome any physical limitation. Carlos Rodriguez had lost an arm, but he'd never lost what made him a warrior. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories every day. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe that true strength comes from within, subscribe for more inspiring stories about overcoming the impossible.